If you're someone listening to this that's not a member but maybe aspiring to be, the biggest mistake that you can make joining either Functional Lifestyles or any gym or any program you do is thinking, let me try it out for a few months. Let me start with 1 or 2 times a week to see if it works. Dumb. It is the dumbest thing that you can do, because the only way that you can make it work is actually investing enough energy, time, and resources into that thing to actually see it work. All right, what is up, everybody? Welcome to Pursuit of Balance, episode 44. I'm going to talk about how exercise can actually improve your mental health, right? And obviously kind of a little bit on par with Mental Health Awareness Month in May. Coach Hannah in Mountain View actually did a fun little workshop with all the coaches here too, and a handful of clients kind of going over different things where they had different stations with breathing and journaling and and I think for Coach Hannah, it was like a really fun thing to do because that's something she's very passionate about as well. And it's something I talk about a lot, obviously when I was doing check-ins, but mainly with content and just the podcast. I just love the subject. So I was kind of trying to figure out do I make this an episode more about like how to improve mental health, how to reduce stress? And I was like, I kind of feel like it was a little basic, or I feel like I've done it a handful of times. So I tried to kind of segue this episode to be more of like, how does exercise itself, and I'm going to kind of break this up into 2 parts, directly improve mental health and indirectly improve mental health? Because a lot of the stuff that, like I was just mentioning, the things that, having hobbies and spending time with each other and journaling and breathing and all the stuff that everyone's heard a million times, I feel like, when it comes to like, how do I actually reduce reduce stress and improve mental health? So I wanted to kind of stay off the, in a sense, the paved path that most people are talking about and get a little bit off the beaten path and talk about other things, right? So I started writing things down, as I always do, started doing my research, and like I said, I want to start with the actual kind of tactical stuff of like mechanically, and then what's the mechanism of why exercise is actually going to be improving mental health. And it was funny, like through my research, I was trying to also get a little bit more detailed of like, is it HIIT training? Is it low aerobic training, like zone 2 training? Is it strength training? Is it mobility training? Like, does the type of training or type of exercise have an influence on some of these factors? And interestingly enough, like there was a separation of certain things, right? Because I always say this, like when I'm in fit search with people, that it's funny that we use exercise as a tool to reduce stress, right? So a lot of times, and the unfortunate part about the modern human now is like most people are coming in with like a 6 to an 8 out of 10 on stress. Like I'm not joking, that is the average that I see. So a lot of people are definitely stressed out in this area, or like at least our demographic of client that we work with. And I always like to remind them that, like, understand that exercise is a stress to the human body, right? Exercise is catabolic by definition, meaning it is breaking your body down. You are breaking tissue down when you're here. How you become anabolic and how you actually build muscle and recover and improve from these things and get stronger, all that stuff, is by going home and nourishing yourself and sleeping well and, ideally managing stress. But that recovery phase is actually where all the growth is coming from. So it's one of those things that it's like we're using stress to fight stress. Well, the reality of it is like you're not necessarily fighting stress. You're actually building resilience behind it, right? So the first one that I have is exercise itself actually increases BDNF, right? Brain-derived neurotropic factor, right? So these are basically like little proteins that the brain makes. And these things will help grow neurons. They'll strengthen the connections, and they'll help keep neurons alive, right? And so kind of what I wrote down is like it's basically like the miracle grow for the brain. So when you think about, and there's actually, this is kind of like a little tangent too, but there's a book. What book was I reading? I want to say it might have been Atomic Habits or maybe High Performance Habits. But one of the books, and it was something around learning, right? Like actually one of the best times to learn is actually post-exercise, right? And this is actually in relationship to BDNF, right? So it allows your body to go and actually have a growth factor behind some of the things that we're talking about from the neuroplasticity side of the brain, right? The second one is it recalibrates your HPA axis, right? I'm not going to get into the actual specifics of that because I just don't understand it well enough. But an easy way to think about it is like it is raising your tolerance to stress, right? Like so the threshold of tolerance is going to become higher with exercise. And the interesting thing on those first 2 points is it seems from what I found that aerobic training actually has the biggest benefit and the biggest kind of improvement in these 2 things, right? So, because when you think about exercise at a really high intensity, right? It's like I think about this in my CrossFit days or, most people doing Barry's Boot Camp or Orange Theory, things that are just sold on high intensity training. It's good to have, but like how I've said in, probably multiple episodes now at this point, that like the majority and the biggest chunk of your training when it comes to the cardiovascular side should be more in the low intensity, more aerobic states. And then maybe once or twice a week max, you're going to be doing some of these higher, threshold type of training, right? So your threshold runs or your high intensity runs, your HIIT workouts or whatever those might be, because those are more catabolic. Those are also more sympathetic, meaning they're just like, it's a bigger stress response on the body. And if you're doing too much of that, then you're going to also start to go backwards on these 2 points, right? So we want to find this sweet balance, and this is obviously AKA pursuit of balance with our training, because overtraining can lead to stress, right? Undertraining can lead to stress. So everything has this natural, bell-shaped curve when we think about the stress response in life. So when it comes to those two, I thought it was interesting that like strength training and aerobic training kind of actually tend to be at the higher ends of it. And strength training, what the interesting thing was like, obviously there's a lot of aspects of just the body image and things that you get from just the changes physically that happen to the body. But from more of the neuroprotective side or the stress resilience side, and even kind of some of the, which I'll talk about in a second, but some of the neurotransmitters and some of the things that our body releases, you actually get more benefit, I think, on the cardio side, which is pretty cool. Vagal tone and HRV is another one that I wrote down. So improving these things. So improving vagal tone basically meaning like, this is kind of the same relationship as like having someone with good muscle tone, is a good response to it. The vagus nerve, right? Big nerve that runs from the, bottom of the brain all the way down to the gut. And, what was I just saying I want to say it was actually in Hannah's classes, right? And this is like a weird thing that, this is a weird thing that I'm sharing. My wife and I, we like, do our little, daily hugs, morning hugs, nightly hugs. We always go, There's a thing with humming that actually improves kind of, or down regulates the stress response in the body, right? And that is basically in relationship to the vagus nerve, how humming and, vibration itself, and this is vibration therapy as well, can actually help down regulate kind of vagal tone, right? So when I wrote this down, as far as the relationship to exercise, the heart rate variability is basically at the current moment a proxy for vagal tone, meaning like it is one of the only metrics that I think that we have that can kind of directly give us some information on the sympathetic or parasympathetic kind of system, right? So the autonomic nervous system, meaning like when HRV is trending down or is naturally lower in somebody, that is telling us that somebody is basically more stressed out, right? And I use that as a very kind of umbrella term because there's a lot of things that can cause that, right? And someone's stressed that, or someone's HRV, that's trending up over time, or someone's HRV, maybe that's a little bit higher, can maybe be signs of a more parasympathetic kind of tone, right? Which is in relationship to kind of vagal tone HRV. In my personal experience, the best I've ever had in my heart. So like I started wearing Whoop back in 2019. I probably wore it all the way through 23, 24. I stopped wearing it for a couple of years and I just put it back on probably about 6-9 months ago now. And my HRV and my heart rate is kind of shit compared to where it was in the pandemic, because the pandemic I was running a lot, obviously having so much time, right? And when you're in good aerobic shape, your resting heart rate is naturally going to be lower, right? So when you look at endurance athletes, I mean, these guys, some of these like really top performing athletes are like in the, the mid 40s, low 40s, some of them even high 30s. It's crazy. But their HRV is also higher, right? So generally I will say outside of the stress response part of it, there is good data to show that the better cardiovascular, like the better your aerobic fitness and health is, naturally these kind of improve too as a byproduct of some of these other things I was just talking about, but it also improves HRV too. The next one I wrote down is neurotransmitters, right? So these are kind of like the things that exercise increase, right? So serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine, endocannabinoids, which is basically like what we would think about in our runs is like our runner high. Your body's releasing these things. And I don't know if anybody's ever experienced this feeling. And I will say that out of all things, I think the runner's high is probably one of the best feelings that you get. Having a good PR, working out around other people, the community, the social, the competitive, the energy, like there's parts that make exercise super fun. But on an individual response level and a physiological response. Like I always think about this, and it's funny because like I don't get this on shorter runs sometimes. Like sometimes I have to run long enough, or it takes a good song or a good pace or a good mood, and sometimes it happens a little quicker. But if you've ever gotten a runner's high, you understand the feeling of like what it does to the body, right? And how you feel. Like there's times where I'm like, man, I feel like I could cry. I'm just like so happy. I get the little tingles. And that's a mixture, I think, of good music and obviously the feeling that's happening in the body. But that is in relationship to the neurotransmitters and also what your body is increasing and releasing during exercise itself, right? Okay, so now like those are like the more direct things that happen during exercise, right? So I want to kind of shift a little bit more towards some of the indirect things of how does exercise improve our stress response or improve our mental health, right? And the first thing I wrote down was the identity shift that happens, right? So I say this all the time, I say this in Fit Starts, I say this in clients, I say this on content when I'm talking about this, is like the biggest mistake that most people make is they underestimate the amount of volume that's required to be successful with their goals, right? And the reason why I put lifestyles in my business name is because I want people to inherit this mindset that the only way that this works forever is by doing it forever, right? The vehicle and the route that got you there is generally going to be the vehicle that's going to keep you there. There's some nuance to that because it's much easier to maintain or stay somewhere than it is to get somewhere. But a lot of people, I think, just underestimate, right? They just, they think that like, okay, I'm going to do this for a couple months and see how it works, or I'm going to do this once or twice a week. And this is the biggest mistake that I see for if you're someone listening to this that's not a member but maybe aspiring to be. The biggest mistake that you can make joining either Functional Lifestyles or any gym or any program you do is thinking, let me try it out for a few months. Let me start with 1 or 2 times a week to see if it works. Dumb, right? It is the dumbest thing that you can do because the only way that you can make it work is actually investing enough energy, time, and resources into that thing to actually see it work, right? That's like me being like, oh, let me get in a relationship. Like, let's hang out like once a week. Let's just see how it works for a few months because I don't want to get like too deep too fast. Or like, I want to get rich, but let's just start with like Mondays at work and see how that works. It's like, it doesn't make sense. It's stupid, but so many people do it because either A, they're fearful of it not working, fearful of the amount of work that's required. Obviously the cost behind it, but it's like, it's more expensive to spend a little bit of money that make it not work than it is to spend a little bit more money and actually make it work because now you're making your investment actually create an ROI. But when I say identity shift, you have to remember all the things and the habits that are changing and the mindset shift, the changes that happen of like, A, you're proving to yourself that you can form some layer of discipline, right? Discipline is something that I think is kind of thrown around easily a lot of times in my industry of like, you just need to have more discipline. And there's once again, a lot of nuance to that, I think. I know. But showing to yourself that you can be consistent, that you can show up, that you can do hard things, right? That you can actually overcome plateaus, that you can sit through flat periods or down periods, that you can recalibrate with your training and how you feel. Like, there's so many things habitually that change over time. And I say this all the time about myself that I think I train personally more for the mental than I do for the physical. Don't get me wrong. I train definitely a lot for the physical because I like looking a certain way. I like being a certain body fat percentage. I like being a certain weight. And I also like feeling athletic, right? And that's to a degree strong, a degree mobile, and degree fast, or, obviously having some endurance. But the mental part of it is what makes me feel good, right? And I think at the end of the day, most of us will do training for one of the top reasons always written down is like, I want to feel better, right? Like I don't feel good. And that could be because I feel tight or I feel like I'm in pain or I don't feel good emotionally because I don't like the way I look in the mirror, or I don't feel good because, in the social relationship side, I can't find a partner because of maybe the way I am or the way I look. Like these are all things that are just the reality of being a human. But at the end of the day, like we're chasing this feeling, right? And there is, as we just talked about, very direct things that happen. But the identity change and the confidence that comes from proving to yourself that you are capable of doing so, those are the real changes, right? And this is why I like, once again, I'm going to preach this again, that I think it's you need to get to training more times than not. Like if there's 7 days a week, 4 days at an absolute, not minimum, 4 days ideally is a better way to say it, you need to be training because you are proving to yourself that I can do hard things more times than not. Still need to recover. I'm not someone that's going to preach here and say that you need to do 7 days a week of working out, 6 days a week of working out. For athletes or someone that's taking it more serious or obviously just really is attracted to it, yeah, 5 or 6 is fine. But you need to remember there's probably a little bit more importance or kind of structure around your deloading your time off or how you structure your volume of training, period, right? So just remember, there's a lot of identity shifts that take place with being consistent with training and exercise itself, right? Next one I wrote down is community and social, right? And this is obviously a little bit more kind of on the group training side of things, but like I even remember when I first started training and working out with my parents, we would go to Extreme Fitness, they walk in and my parents would see the same people every weekend, then we go with them and, they're asking how they're doing. You meet people at the gym, so like I met my wife at a gym, granted it was work. So like there's a huge part of exercise that how does it improve mental health being the focus of this episode that is derived from some of the indirect things that most of us don't think that we're signing up for. Some people join a gym because they want the community. They need another layer of connection or just a layer of connection period maybe that they don't have. Some people join it and don't realize that that's actually such a big benefit, right? Because as humans, we are social creatures, right? Some of you might be like, I'm more introverted. I don't need it. Everyone needs it. It's just on a continuum of how much do you need it. Some people need it more than others. Everyone needs it. And some of us don't have the best relationships with like our immediate family, or some people don't have maybe as big of a friend group, or some of us work remotely. So they don't get to see people at work. And this is why I think, remote work is such a dangerous trap for the younger generation and all generations, is because like most of us like meet our partners and friends at work and college and things like this. So I don't underestimate that, but I think like they're all one of the greatest things about group training, and obviously why I love what we do at Functional Lifestyles. Even like we had a member outing a few weeks ago. It's like, hey, it's like we have 800 something members, right? And like only 100, I'd probably say 180, maybe 200 max is the most I've ever had at a member outing. So it's like as we grow, I think the percentage of people that show up to these things like feels like it gets smaller relative to the size, which is interesting. But like we will always do, because for me, I think it's fun, even though it's a lot of work, it's a lot of stress of just like setting these things up and paying all this money for all the food and drinks and vendors and tables and chairs. I just think it's a fun way for us to connect outside of just training, right? So big part, right? Next one I have is being competitive with yourself, competitive with others, right? Competitive with others, I think, can be a little slippery slope, because keeping up with the Joneses has been a proven track to just fucking make your life miserable on all aspects of life, not even just exercise, because you are just choosing to view, and this is what Instagram and social media has done for so many people, is they just look at everyone as like, they're in such great shape, everyone's rich, everyone's driving a Lamborghini in a penthouse in Miami. And I'm like, no, that's not the fucking reality, right? That is a very, very small percentage of people, and even some of those people are faking it, right? Like it's an easy thing to, what's the joke? You can rent a Lambo, not a jet. I don't know, I'm getting sidetracked here, but when I say competitive with yourself, one of the best things that we can do as humans is be competitive with ourselves, because competition or competitiveness is the thing that is going to fight complacency. You are either going to stay competitive and keep wanting to grow and figure out how you can beat yourself or beat the old version of yourself, or even beat other people. Having external competition is not a bad thing. I just think it's more of a slippery slope. It's definitely way more healthy to compete with yourself. Is the exact opposite of someone becoming complacent, right? The people that are less competitive, I view, are more complacent over time, because they just don't find the challenge exciting, right? And you have to remember that from a psychological perspective, progress drives motivation, right? And if you want to stay motivated and you want to prevent yourself from being complacent, you need to always remain grateful on the process. You need to always remain grateful that like the work that you're doing is just a part of it, right? In order to get to an end result, instead of focusing only on that. But most importantly is like you need to just stay competitive with yourself. And if you can't do it really well with yourself, then put yourself in groups. Why I say it's a slippery slope, I saw this a lot in CrossFit, right? I saw this a lot when I was in men's physique. Sports, I think it's, I don't know. I'm a sore loser personally. Like that's something I can be very transparent with. Like I remember I always tell the story. The first time I really remember crying was losing a tournament. I had my head down doing the stupid handshake at the end of the game. Oh, fuck, And that's just because I was so competitive. I don't like losing. I hate losing. So I think there is a dangerous side of it that can mentally be diminishing. But when I'm competitive with myself and I stay focused on the work and I just take action all the time, like I generally feel really, really good, right? So it's easier for me to get into that flow state. The next one is understanding that the best way to train the mind is through the body. I've always said this, that mental health is something that a lot of people talk about. Physical health is something that I think still a lot of people talk about, but we tend to kind of push this one down that it's maybe less important than mental health. They're equally as important in my view. And people, there was a good, I'm not going to remember the newscaster, but whatever. There was kind of an interview that was going on. The guy was like, "Oh, do you prefer treating mental health first versus physical health?" And then the newscaster was like, "Oh, mental health is definitely more important." The other guy was like, "Honestly, I would challenge you. I think the best way through to the brain, to the mind, is through the body, right? So when we exercise, all these things that I've just been talking about improve that state, right?" So that's obviously a huge, big thing, right? So the next one I wrote down is routine and structure are stabilizers, right? Like we feel good when we have structure. We feel good when we have routine. We feel good when we feel like the spring cleaning and we're clean and we're organized. Organization mentally or physically in the real world leads to organization in our brains, right? Which is decluttering, in a sense, our mental state. When you have a cluttered house or a cluttered room or a cluttered work schedule or a cluttered car, you also, without even knowing it, are cluttered mentally because you are maybe unconsciously or consciously thinking about all the shit that you need to fix and address, right? So having that routine and building that structure helps stabilize the body or sort of stabilize the mental state. Next one, obviously, most people know this, but hard workouts, hard days, productive days lead to good night's sleeps, because I've kind of had this shift over the last few years that I've realized one of the best things for my mental state is productivity. When I'm productive and not busy, I sleep well, sleep like a baby. When I'm busy and not productive, I don't sleep well. I'm more stressed out. When I have really, really tough workouts or really, really hard training sessions or really, really good training weeks, I sleep better. When I don't train as much or I'm just a little lazier or I give 50% effort on a training or a workout, I don't sleep as well, right? And there's some psychological and physiological reasons on why that happens. And then the last one, this is a weird little, last little note I wrote down, which is light exposure, right? So for a lot of us that are, I guess Palo Alto is a little bit different now since it's not an outdoor gym. I've always liked outdoor gyms. I've always liked outdoor workouts and sports. And I think, getting up in the morning and having some light exposure and creating that routine once again is another big benefit, because one of the best things for me, I would put this at the top 3, top 5 is getting outside, sun, right? So for me, for example, today for my workout, I'm just going to go on a light run and then do like a little bit of some like back and arms for my workout. But just getting outside and going on a run, I feel 10 times better than I do being inside blue light and running on a treadmill, right? So there are so many reasons. That could be a whole nother episode on why sun makes us feel so good. So I kind of wrote that down because, yes, exercise and some of the things that were done outside, one of those indirect benefits as well is the light exposure that we get, the circadian rhythm alignment that we get from that, and more importantly, the feeling that you get behind that. So I hope that helps. I hope that just want to kind of share some things for you guys that you can think about. One of the other amazing benefits are obviously the laundry list of things that I just gave you on how these can improve mental health, right? There are so many things that we can do in our lives to reduce stress, reduce the risk of depression and anxiety and all these things, but exercise still tends to be at the top of the food chain. And we've proven this even with some of the SSRIs and the antidepressants, that exercise is just as good. The interesting thing is obviously the compliance or the ability to stay consistent with exercise is lower than taking a drug. But the efficacy and the actual effectiveness of it is actually higher with exercise. So I would much rather people be exercising than taking drugs to obviously handle their depression or their state of their mental health, right? So hope you guys enjoyed that one. And if you find that useful for somebody else, share it as always.